This conversation is for the person who is suffering, or for the person who knows someone who's suffering quite a bit, somebody who broke down. And I'm telling you, when a person breaks down, two things happen. They become obsessive with what happened. What happened? In other words, they cannot get over that question, what happened? Now, I say two things because that obsession, and I think obsession is the right word here, because the mind goes into this looping and all they can think about is what happened. But that question can take on one of two consequences. Some people cannot stop thinking about what happened out there. Why did the bank close down? Why did the manager fire me? Why did my husband leave, my wife leave? Why did the kid die? Why did the person drive drunk and killed my neighbor? You know, that kind of thing, right? So they keep on obsessing about what happened out there. Why was the baby born with those genes that led to cancer? And on and on and on. But the question is centered on the outside world. The other way this can manifest is the question is centered on the inside world. It's like, what happened to me? I wasn't like this before. What happened to me? Did I become weak? I broke down, but what broke down? They are aware of the fact that in the world out there, something went massively wrong. People betrayed them, or things went wrong out there. They're aware of that. They don't think other people are perfect, but they're astounded. They're surprised. They're disappointed at themselves for how badly they have broken down, and particularly with their inability to respond to the situation. Now, again, this bifurcates into two consequences. Some people cannot stop talking if they have people around them who will listen. To those people who are listening to the same stories over and over, the person who's broken becomes toxic quite quickly, and the broken person eventually, quickly, finds him or herself alone because other people cannot stand that repetition. The other manifestation of that incessant inquiry is the person who becomes quiet. They won't talk to anybody because, number one, they're too busy trying to figure out what happened. Again, one of two things, either what happened out there or what happened in here. But in addition to having their minds overly busy with the situation, they also don't believe anybody else can understand it. In other words, they feel that, you know, when a person in the movies, they're framed and they know that all of the evidence does stack up against them, but they're not guilty. They know they didn't do it, but they do know that the evidence stacks up against them. It's that kind of thing. They realize that they look guilty in whatever situation it is. They realize that they're screwed, basically, because the way they were framed, and this can be in a business situation, in a personal situation, you know, their health, well, whatever. You know, that's true. I have been a smoker all these years, whatever, right? I mean, they realize that they look guilty, but they know they're not guilty. And so they realize there's no point in trying to explain myself. Nobody's going to try, nobody's going to understand. And that person, the one who won't talk, man or woman, more commonly men, is very difficult to work with because it takes a while to get to the meat of the, you know, the core of the apple there, because they won't tell you what's really bugging them. It's really difficult. When a person breaks down, and if you go into a group setting, like group therapy, and everybody there suffered a breakdown, let's say, and then they ask you, okay, hey, John, I'm making this up, right? What happened to you? He says, well, my cat died, and I cannot continue living since my cat died. And no disrespect to people who love cats. I'm making this up to make a point here. Everybody else in the group has no problem with their cats dying. Their cat dying wouldn't break them down. So they would say, hey, John, come on, man, a cat dying is not the end of the world. You know, I've lost 5 cats. Nothing happened to me. My situation is serious because my wife left, or my husband left, or my mother died. Do you see the difference? So the external circumstance, you know, it's kind of irrelevant. They're all right or wrong or unjust or unfair to one extent or another. Or maybe it's just the way life is, or maybe nobody's at fault. But the external circumstance, as far as recovery is concerned, as far as healing is concerned, is irrelevant. So the person who is obsessed about what happened out there, in some ways that takes longer. The process of healing takes longer because we have to let them vent out all of their frustrations and trying to understand what happened out there, and then understand that that's not what really in other words, all of that may be true, but it's not what broke. What broke is them. What broke is their capacity to deal with the situation. And some people come into the office already at that stage. I know that what happened out there is bad, but I know that it's not as bad as the way I feel. That kind of thing. But the person who is still thinking that the problem is out there, we have to go through the whole conversation first. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes we lose them in between. You know, it's just the nature of the beast. And then start talking about what really happened here, what's really relevant here, which is not that your manager fired you, it is that your capacity to deal with what happened was insufficient and it broke down. So when we get to that stage, oftentimes I use an analogy. I say to people, look, perhaps you go to the gym every day and you can lift 100 pounds with your right arm, let's say, right? And that's not a problem. Let's say you do like a biceps curl and you do 100 pounds and you've been doing that for a while. And there's your tendon and your biceps muscle, you know, and you've been doing that for a while. One day you try to lift 150 pounds and the tendon snaps right off, clear off the bone, comes right off the bone. The muscle retracts. It won't heal on its own because the muscle contracts. The tendon head is not even close to the bone anymore. You know, the muscle contracted, it pulled the tendon away from the bone. And so what happened there? Well, the strength of the muscle was higher, larger than the strength of the attachment between the tendon and the bone. So the muscle pulled, but the bone didn't come along because the tendon detached. So the effort exceeded the system's ability to handle the load. Just like a rope, you hung too much weight off of it and the rope snapped. Same kind of thing. Now, once that happens, let's go back to the example of the tendon. Once that happens, let's say in the medical sense, what do we have to do? Several things will have to happen here. Number one, they will need a special procedure called surgery. There's no way to fix this without surgery because, like I said, the muscle will retract, the tendon won't even be in the region. They're going to have to open it up. They're going to have to go in there and stitch or staple the tendon to the bone. I remember when I was in orthopedic rotation, but observing the surgeries, I used to be like, oh my gosh, it's like carpentry, it's unbelievable. A lot of it nowadays is done laparoscopy, with cameras and instruments and stuff. You don't open it up anymore. Sometimes the surgeon does have to open. But it's really, really interesting because as a student, you're watching, I'm next to the surgeon, but I'm not even looking at the patient, I'm looking at the monitor. But looking at the monitor, you can see what he's doing. In this case was a he. And they pretty much go in there with essentially one big pliers, pull the tendon over, put it in the right place, and basically staple it to the bone. So that's the surgery. Then what? Then we need rest and recovery because the tendon and the bone has to reattach. And once it reattaches, the person is going to need physical therapy. They're going to have to build the strength and flexibility all over again. It's going to take a while. And then what? They're going to need special treatment in order to survive. It's going to take a while because if they go back to the gym and try to lift 150 pounds again, it will snap again. And each time it snaps, it's more difficult to fix. This is what happened to professional athletes. Eventually, they can't have surgery anymore. It won't stick anymore. So why am I telling you this? Because when we snap or when we break down, an analogous process is necessary. These types of things that we're talking about, these kinds of burnout and breakdown, will not go away with time alone. Time alone will not do it. People say, oh, time heals all. Not this kind of thing. Time does not heal. You're going to need a special type of process analogous to surgery that we call therapy. What kind of therapy you choose is basically up to you. up to what you have available to you. Not everybody has availability of all kinds of therapies. It depends on what you can afford, what you have available in your area. It depends on many factors. So it depends on your choices, but it also depends on what choices you have to choose from. And it depends on a number of factors, but so you're going to need some kind of therapy, and then you're going to need rest, and that rest is going to consist of, whatever it is that you were doing before, you're going to have to not do for a while. If the breakdown was precipitated by the breakdown of a relationship, a romantic relationship, let's say, you're going to need to be single for a while. And people never think that that's necessary. Everybody universally thinks that they're ready for the next relationship right away. But we make some really bad decisions in that state, and other other people see that fragility and take advantage of you, and you will be hurt more badly if you don't give yourself some time to recover. So here's what happens. I was talking to somebody last week at the office, and I said, I don't consume alcohol. It's just a personal choice. I don't think it's any better or worse than anybody. It's just my choice. Since I was a kid, I was into athletics. I didn't want to get into alcohol. So I never got into it, so I never drank. So, I've tasted here and there, but I don't consume alcohol regularly. Point is, I told this guy at the office, I said, look, I can understand somebody drinking if that's their choice. What I cannot understand, and I really can't, I do not understand the person drinking and driving, particularly in the era of rideshare and taxis and buses and trains, and horsebacks and whatever else is out there, or bicycles. Why would you drink and drive? That I don't understand. If you know you're going to drink, if you want to drink and you know you're going to drink, make arrangements, so you won't drive that day. He says, well, you don't get it. What happens is when you drink, then your judgment goes out the window and you actually believe you're okay to drive. So when he said that, of course, I said, my apologies, I understand that. I think I sounded harsh the way I said it at first. I do understand that, because the same exact thing happens when a person is broken. So let's say that they have this major betrayal in a relationship situation, let's say. They feel completely broken. Another person shows up, they feel they're completely ready to embark on a marriage with that person the next day. They feel that. It's just like the person who's drunk. They feel they're okay to drive. I'm using the analogy here of drinking and driving, but if you have broken down, whatever the precipitating event was, betrayal at work, a health problem, a marital problem, whatever the case was, you're going to have to take a break from that for a while.